Hello, everyone. Welcome to this OVE seminar on IDB support for gender. For those of you that I haven't met yet, my name is Ivory Young-Protzel, and since May, I am the director of the Office of Evaluation and Oversight. It is a pleasure for me to be co-hosting today this event with the Executive Vice President and to have such a great panel with colleagues from Energy, ICS, Transport, Gender and Diversity, SPD, IDB Invest. The goal is to share our common knowledge. We would like to share some of the insights from an evaluation we carried out very recently, as well as to hear from management from the bank on the directions in which they are taking for the IDB group to go forward. OVE undertook this evaluation because of the critical importance of gender equality to Latin America and the Caribbean, and the big effort that the IDB group is doing to promote it. What we found is that the IDB group has made a significant progress mainstreaming gender, both in terms of the numbers and the extent to which gender is mainstream. I will just give you two numbers. On the period 2011-2016, the bank approved 400 operations with gender elements. But of those, the fraction that had a proper diagnostics, actions, monitoring and evaluation, meaning results indicators, increased from 33rd to 43%. Sure, we can do better, but there is progress. Not only that, the bank has positioned itself as a forerunner on the development community. It has been the first MDB that approved an operational gender policy with a dual approach. We aim to have proactive actions, not for gender mainstreaming, but also on the investment operations. And I can tell you a little bit about that. Before I joined IDB, I was at the European Investment Bank and I was head of evaluation. EIB has only recently approved an evaluation policy. It's only starting. And I think EIB could learn quite a lot from IDB. And I think we have to do something about that. Great. Having said that, and although few impact evaluations and pilot interventions have been carried out so far, OVE evaluation also highlights that the bank could enhance its efforts to measure the effectiveness of the activities that mainstream gender. How do we know that we are reaching the results that we wish for? And that's why we are here today, to open an internal and candid conversation about the lessons that the IDB group is drawing from the experience of different departments that are not only advancing on gender mainstreaming, but are also measuring the effectiveness of their actions. In other words, going from mainstreaming to overall effectiveness. Now, as with every evaluation, OVE's goal is to provide accurate and constructive analysis and recommendations to help the IDB group achieve as much as possible for the people of Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, we can do that only because throughout the process, we benefit from the insights and the knowledge from our colleagues from the IDB group, management, staff, board members. So I want to take advantage of this opportunity to express OVE's gratitude to all of them. I'm very pleased to have representatives from OVE, from management, from the board, here today to discuss this important topic. We will start with a presentation of the main results and messages from OVE's evaluation. It will be presented by Jonathan Rose from OVE, who led the study, after which Carola Alvarez from SPD will share with us their views, the views of the bank on this evaluation. That will be followed by a panel moderated by the Executive Vice President, Julie Katzman, joined by several colleagues from the IDB group. At the end, there will be the opportunity to ask questions both for the members here in the room as well as those who are following the debate through the chat. So, thank you very much for joining us today and to contributing to the efforts of the IDB Group to further gender mainstreaming and effectiveness. Thank you. John, please.
Great. So thanks for all of you for being here today. And I do want to give a big thanks for all of you here who participated in interviews and in the survey, and especially those who helped us when we went to the field, because that really helped give us a lot of the information we needed for this evaluation. So, is the PowerPoint working? Anyway, I'll start. So the evaluation covered both gender and diversity. For this presentation today, we're going to focus on the gender side, given that this is an event about gender mainstreaming. And so the first slide is going to show, I'll anticipate this, is that what's really great is that we look through, the bank has been in line with the international community. So throughout the period, the international community recognized the importance of gender, and there was a women in development movement, which said, let's focus on improving women's lives, access to markets, access to labor, and the bank's first policy was in that stage. Eventually, the community realizes that, it's a little bit more, let's take a more holistic approach. Gender in development movement, which really brought forward mainstreaming, so that there's specific socioeconomic roles that women and men have had traditionally, and let's understand those and think about those when we do development. And this is during that period when the IDB ended up with its mainstream policy. Later, the community recognizes, well, we need both of this. We need to think about directly investing in gender issues and women as well as mainstreaming. And that was in 2010 when the IDB became the first of the institutions, as I already mentioned, to have this dual approach, where it really matters to think not only about directly investing in gender gaps, but also thinking about mainstreaming and promoting that. So let's see if I can do this by memory now. The next slide would have been showing you that between 2011 and 2016, that's the period that we covered in the evaluation. We wanted to cover the period noting right after the policy was approved and it was being implemented, that the percentage of loans that included some element of gender, so that means either had a diagnostic, an activity, or indicator related to gender, went from about 24 to slightly over 50%. So here we are. All right, also, so I forgot to mention, we had some questions we were asking. So, but we were looking at the relevance, the extent, and then the institutional factors. So we're going to end, to try to explain, well, why did we see these changes? Okay, and so this was sort of the historical approach that I was talking about here. And so this is the point, this is where we're starting, right? We're looking at the bank after we've approved the latest gender policy, right? So 23 to 48%, right? So you can see immediately after policy was implemented, you see a lot more operations. The staff are responding, they're doing their work. Not only do we see an increase in loans, but technical cooperation, country strategies. And so I can tell you, my guess is today, almost every country strategy that's been approved in the past couple of years has gender and diversity as a cross-cutting issue. So you're seeing this beyond just the operations. Okay. Now this graph here, what's important about this is to show that these are all the different divisions of the bank. For private sector, we have the legacy of SCF OMJ. But what you see is these are all the thematic areas with where the bank is working. So you've got, what's important to know is we've gone beyond these traditional sectors where everyone says, okay, health, maternal health, education, let's get gender parity in education. But we've got infrastructure, we've got CSD, we've got IFD. They're all mainstreaming gender in very different ways. And what's really important to note is a lot of the thematic areas that are being addressed in mainstreaming are very different from the main objectives of the sector divisions that are working on this. So you're going to see some presentations from INE, and they're doing a lot of labor market support. And so I think that's very neat. But what that also raises is there's a lot of opportunity within the bank for the different divisions to work together to gather their lessons and to move forward and learn what works and what doesn't. And as Ivory mentioned, we had to come up with a term that was not vertical logic, because the bank has its own. Carola's here. We have a very strict definition of vertical logic. But basically, if you think about the vertical logic of the gender interventions, so if a project had an activity or diagnostic activity and indicator that are all interrelated, we were seeing an increase in that. So that's 33 to 43%, and this is important because this is getting at the depth with which we're mainstreaming. And still, the biggest areas where we're working on is women's economic empowerment and health. Okay, so what's important are what are the factors? What's causing the bank to change the way it's mainstreaming and to increase? Political leadership is very important. It's a very, very clear mandate at this bank. Resource allocation, we didn't hear any person tell us that they didn't have the money to do this. There's money available, there's TC funds, the Canadian funds, the climate funds have been very helpful. And technical capacity. So one of the thing we heard a lot is, I really want to do something, but I don't know how. So many people have worked with GDI, and others have taken upon themselves to figure out what they can do. And I think that's been important. With respect to the business practices, again, so we've got the bank practices what it preaches. Human resources, we're seeing much better results in terms of gender parity within the bank, and that carries into the operations we do. One of the things with respect to business practices that was a challenge to some was the rigor with which we have a DEM, and we need to make sure that we have right indicators that are rigorous. And in some cases, we had projects where they didn't have adequate baselines. They weren't able to include gender indicators. And actually, there were some projects where we didn't think there was any gender, and we went to the country and said, no, this project here has more gender than any other one. We just couldn't get it in the document. So that's an area where I think Carola might speak about where we are improving. The accountability mechanisms, they're clear targets in our corporate reports with respect to measuring our effort and the inputs and the amount of projects with mainstreaming. We still can do more to create more incentives on the results of our work. And then finally, as you always say, at the end of the day, well, the borrowing countries aren't prioritizing this. So we did hear examples of where there was a project that was very obvious gender. You could put gender there very, very clearly, social inclusion type projects. And then the project team leader felt very sad because at the end of the day, it was told, no, we don't want it in there. But I think we're seeing more and more. And the more we do this, the more the countries understand that's going to be important going forward. So with respect to effectiveness, we saw, we only saw a little bit. 2011 to 2016 was our period. So there were only 13 projects in that sample that had a close, had a PCR. There were mixed results, but we can't generalize. We're gonna, we need more time to look at that. So where this led us to were two of the recommendations related to gender were we need to increase the evidence base. And I think you're gonna see some examples here today of different divisions of the banks who are building that evidence base. And then two, at the end of the day, we still need to work with our partners in the country to help inform them of the importance. And I think if you do a good job on recommendation one, that feeds into recommendation two. The more results we show, the more the countries are going to understand the importance of mainstreaming gender. So everyone on their seat, you have a bookmark where you can get the evaluation. And I'd like to turn it over now to Carola Aldridge, who will give us her perspective from SPD.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to give not just the perspective from SPD, but I think the perspective from the bank and from everybody that's been working on these issues for such a long time through all their different phases and iterations. And I think the first thing I want to say is that it was a real pleasure working alongside your team on this evaluation, because I think we coordinated really well in terms of what the messages you were finding meant for us, and whether what you were seeing was something that made sense for the practitioners and how we are aligned with each other. So that allowed us to respond very quickly to the evaluation, because we already had discussed what was coming, whether it made sense and how it made sense, right? So we focused mostly, and I want to talk briefly about this on the first recommendation, which was we obviously are doing a lot of things, but we need to not pause, but at the same time pay attention to summarizing and comparing the results of what we're getting, of what we're doing, and building an evidence-based body of knowledge so that we know what works and what is not working so well and why, right? The other thing, so one example that I want to give, I'll give several examples, but before that, I want to also thank you because I think the evaluation pointed to the fact that even though we have very strong standards for evaluation, we were creating incentives we were being tougher on ourselves than we needed to be. And we were creating incentives or disincentives to do more on the gender innovation frontier. And by innovation, I mean, maybe we don't know if it works, but we want to try it, and we want to build a body of knowledge. And sometimes the project has its own vertical logic, but the project is also a platform for bringing different ideas that complement the project. And so we were able to quickly understand how our standard setting for evaluability was creating these incentives for this kind of activities or ideas to flourish. And I think by the time this evaluation was distributed to the board, we had already changed our incentive structure. And I just heard from the gender division that just did a short assessment of how the new loans look. And they look very aligned and with a lot more innovation in them, which is what we were looking for. So within less than 8 months, we saw a dramatic change in terms of incentives work. And I'm glad that we could align them to be positive incentives. On the other hand, it made us reflect how much we are doing in terms of disseminating research that we're doing. So I'm glad to report that, we talked to a lot of people that were doing these evaluations and projects, and the bank is hosting a special issue next year of the Journal of Economics, Race, and Diversity. 23 of our professionals are authors in 12 papers. It's a special issue of a very rigorous evaluation journal, and we are going to be the main speakers or actors showing our work in that journal. So that's, one example of how we can build a body of evidence. There are many more. But I also want to add that it's not just what we know it works, but also the innovation, testing ideas. And, one of the funnest things that I've been working on since I got back for Speedy is collaborating with the Transportation Gender Lab on implementing the Mama Va, which are these pods that you can have in public transportation hubs so that women can have a space that is secure, safe for them to be able to breastfeed on their way to work. Transportation and traffic is one of our biggest issues in Latin America. And women and children are, going through this, and breastfeeding is one of the practices that we want to increase in Latin America for sure. So, we're working with the city of Buenos Aires and Santiago, Chile, to try to implement this in some of the buses. And I was kind of surprised because I thought, when I was talking to the implementers, I said, well, it must be, Buenos Aires is a hub. It's an international city. Of course, I am from Buenos Aires. What else can I say? But, it must be easy to do this. And they're like, no, actually, people from Buenos Aires are more conservative. They don't like women breastfeeding than in the provinces and the interior of Argentina. So, you find out things about things that you think you know by trying to innovate and get things out there. So I'm really looking forward to developing more ideas like this in the future with all of you. Thank you.
Now we move to our panel discussion. And I have to say, I want to echo what Carola said about working with Ove on this evaluation and generally now. You know, it's the whole thought of learning from each other and making sure that the evaluations that we're doing resonate as we're doing them, I think results in an end product that gets us to an event like this. And I want to apologize to everybody who has been left standing. What is the best thing in the world is that we didn't have enough chairs and we didn't have enough food, which personally embarrasses me not to have enough food. But I really appreciate everybody hanging in and standing in the back. When Ivory suggested, and Jonathan suggested that we create this event, I quickly said yes, and let me co-host it with you, because this is such a great opportunity to say thank you to everybody here for working really hard, and often in times, as Carola just said, when maybe we didn't have the right incentives in place yet, to innovate and to be, as Ivory said, a leader in this area. And now we get to learn from many of the people who have been involved in some of these great projects so that we can do more. So let me introduce, I'm sure that none of them need any introducing, but I will do so, our panel. So Andy Morrison, who is the head of gender and diversity, Ariel Yepes, the division chief for energy, Isabel Granada, who is a senior specialist in transport, Javier Colmenares, who is the division chief for infrastructure and energy at IDB Invest, and Carelia Villamar, who is a senior specialist in, I always now have to look at this because of the change in what it's called, innovation in the citizen services division. You know, the focus of today's panel is about mainstreaming and mainstreaming in the areas that we don't typically think of when we think of gender mainstreaming. But before we get to all of those areas, I'm going to start with Andy and ask you to give us a little bit from your perspective of what's happened in gender mainstreaming, and have we changed?
Thank you for that. And let me echo what Julie said, that I have a profound debt of gratitude with a lot of people in this room for the progress we've made as an institution. And Carola, in her comments, let the cat out of the bag a little bit, which is fine. As of the end of July, so far this year, we have 42% of our sovereign guarantee projects with gender alignment. They're doing a good job of diagnosing gender issues, proposing actions to close gender gaps, and then monitoring progress on that.
And that's under the new regime where those actions don't have to align with the vertical logic of the project itself, right?
And it's clearly spurring innovation. It's double where it was last year. So incentives matter. So I think there have been 4 big changes in the way this bank has addressed gender over, say, the last, and that's, I guess, the comparative advantage of being old, because I can see this evolution over time. The first is, I think we've moved from a generic approach to getting gender in our projects to a much more targeted and strategic approach. And each of the operational divisions now has what they're calling their strategic lines of action in gender. And so they know what they're about. They know what they're trying to achieve. And I'm not going to take words out of Ariel's mouth. He can talk about strategic lines of actions. Transport has them. SPH has them. But I guess I should mention just really quickly so you get a flavor of it. In transport, they're working on getting women in non-traditional occupations. That's what Jonathan mentioned in terms of labor being a key area. But they're also addressing gender disaggregated or sex-specific demand for transport services, and they're addressing issues of violence against women in the space and harassment in the area of public transport. They know what they're about. And I think almost all the divisions of the bank know what they're about. They're going from generic to strategic. The second big change, I think, is, and we're not there yet, and this is a message of the evaluation, is we're beginning to make a cultural change from getting it right in design to getting it right in execution. And we're putting more resources in, making sure our good intentions in design carry over, but we got a lot of work to do still on that. And I think the OVE evaluation points it out. Thirdly, I think we're moving, and again, Jonathan mentioned this in his remarks, we're moving from a donor and a bank-driven agenda to a country-driven agenda. And the example I give to you, and we're very excited about this, is our gender parity task forces. where soon we're going to be working with 6 countries of the region, where countries have come in and said, help us establish public-private partnerships to take policymaking on gender to a macro and strategic level. And I think we've gone in 1 year from 2 countries, and we're going to close this year with 6 countries. So clearly there's more demand on the countryside. And then the last thing, the fourth thing I'd mention, and this is, I think, where we're going to spend much of the rest of the afternoon is, we've gone from the usual suspects to new suspects. And I don't want to talk about my colleagues here as being criminals, right? Maybe Carelia, since you're from ICS, maybe that would be appropriate. But anyway, putting gender into projects 8 or 10 years ago in the institution was the province of the social sector. And the social sector was far ahead of the rest of the bank. I think that's changing. And I'm really happy at the innovation that's gone on in NA and in transport and in other non-social sectors is really remarkable. And it's mirrored in the numbers we see and in the results we're seeing in those non-social sectors. So I'm really happy and looking forward to hearing those emerging good practices and innovation coming out of the non-social sectors.
Super. Thank you, Andy. And you gave us an extra minute to spare.
I try.
I have a countdown clock. We're holding everybody to their timing. So before I turn to Ariel to speak, we're going to start with a little video.
El Programa Nacional de Electrificación Sostenible y Energía Renovable, PNESER, apoya los esfuerzos de Nicaragua para reducir la pobreza y promueve el acceso a un servicio de electricidad eficiente y sostenible.
Me siento feliz pues que hay luz en mi casa y en la escuela.
Esta comunidad del Contadero, ¿verdad? Aquí en la ciudad de Nandaime, hicimos, ¿verdad?, un proyecto de electrificación para beneficiar a la población, la cual no contaba con el servicio de electricidad, ¿verdad?
Yo era la encargada del proyecto en general, la única mujer en el proyecto, encargada de 80 trabajadores a nivel de todas las obras que se hicieron en la subestación. Esta subestación ha traído auge a la población.
Se trata de educar a la gente, capacitarla sobre lo que es la energía eléctrica. Como sabemos, estos asentamientos no tenían energía, o si la tenían de una manera artesanal, como decimos nosotros. Entonces, se trata de reinsertarlos al ciclo comercial.
Ahora pues estamos más seguros con la luminaria, atraemos más clientes ahora con las luminarias que nos acaban de poner, más beneficios para los niños, para nuestros hogares y para la venta. Tenemos más clientela ahora con las luminarias.
Realmente el impacto del PNESER es extraordinario. El primero en lo que es cobertura eléctrica, ¿no? El segundo es en asegurar que aquellos usuarios irregulares puedan tener un suministro estable, normalizado de energía.
So you get a couple of hints in that video that the energy sector actually hasn't really, in the past, prioritized participation by women, hasn't necessarily been that focused in this area. But 2 weeks ago at the board, we approved 2 energy loans, one for Ecuador, one for Honduras. And in both cases, what we saw was that the utility in those countries has, in fact, prioritized gender in its policies, in its practices, and put in place gender action plans that will increase the participation of women generally in the sector and the seniority of women in the sector. So, Ariel, let me start by asking, how did you make that happen?
Thank you, Julie. Well, you know, before starting to talk about how we have been doing this in the energy sector, the dialogue with our counterparts and all that, I just want to make clear some statistics that we have, not only for the energy sector in Latin America, but for the labor markets in general. When we talk about the energy sector in the region, only 20% of the total labor force is women, 20%, 1 of 5. And if we talk about executive positions, that is less than 10%. 9%. So whenever we try to bring this idea of introducing the gender component in our operations is really key to convey a message. If we want to have more transparency, more effectiveness, social inclusion in our operations, definitely we have to find ways to introduce the gender component in our operations. And when you start with those statistics, when you start talking about the potential impacts that you will have by bringing more gender diversification in the institutions with whom we work, either the public utilities or the ministries, it is clear that the potential benefit that they can get is quite relevant. And it's quite relevant because some of the statistics that we have seen in the energy sector is that when you bring women in the sector, the productivity is much higher. Just to give us some examples, there are some studies, Peterson Institute, McKinsey Institute, and also the Swiss bank, that they showcase that by bringing more women to the board of directors of institutions, you increase productivity. There's a strong correlation between productivity and how diversified are the board of directors of different companies. And that is a fact. It is not something that you have to dig very deep to find that result. Also, it is clear from a productivity perspective that by bringing more gender diversification at board positions, but not only board positions, but also executive positions, the quality of the services that you are providing are much higher. Statistically, that is demonstrated. Also, that the returns that you can get in the company are more higher, and of course, transparency. So it's clear that by bringing more gender diversification to the sector, you will get an important impact in the way companies supply or bring resources to the different users that get electricity. Now, that is, let's say, the introduction to engage in a dialogue with our counterparts and let them know how important it is to bring the gender component in the different operations that we have. But from our perspective, it is not only talking about how to bring that component to our operations, it is also to convince ourselves that the gender component is important. And sometimes, even though the specialists are quite clear that the gender component is key, fundamental, relevant to have it in the different operations, the truth is that energy, gender, sometimes it's difficult to think how to put those two elements together. And I can tell you experience that I have while I was working as an energy specialist before being the energy division chief. The first time that I wanted to implement a project for energy transmission, and a gender specialist told me, why don't you bring the gender component into your operation? I was thinking, well, that is going to be difficult because I don't have an access component in here. There's no way to differentiate in the use of energy when you're talking about transmission lines. But this person brought very good ideas. And he said, it is not only about the user. It is also about the company. It is also about making people aware, CEOs, staff, employees in the companies, that bringing the gender component is going to be positive for the company. And I ended up finding, because of the support of this person, some instruments to try to introduce this gender component. But the truth is that we have to be much more innovative, creative, and aggressive. We know the gender component is important. We have to find ways to bring that element into the operations that we implement in the region. And our specialists, fortunately, have taken that as an important element in the dialogue. They are fully convinced that bringing the gender component in the operations is something relevant for the work that we do at the bank. But it seems to me that being more creative, being more aggressive is something that we have to do. We have been learning by doing in the past, and we will continue doing that for sure. But something that we will need to do is to learn with our counterparts and finding ways to introduce more and more effective ways to introduce the gender component in our operations.
So we're running short, but maybe 2 seconds or 19 seconds on Guyana, for example, or the DR, what you're planning to do.
Well, we will have those two operations, and some of the things that we want to do is a little bit similar to what we did in the case of Ecuador and Bolivia and Honduras, is to try to implement from the perspective of the company, what are the changes that have to be introduced to bring more diversification in the labor force in that company. But also to try to complement a more managerial perspective of the company by introducing more transparency in the way people is going to be identified to work in the different positions in the company, but looking for this diversification component as an institutional objective, something that we want to do from an institutional perspective, that it is not only the one that we can get in the implementation of specific actions in the access component, but from an institutional perspective.
So the part of the story that Ariel didn't say is that there was a little bit of internal competition that happened in INE, because I guess 2 or 3 years ago, the transport division really sort of got out in the vanguard of innovating and coming up with various projects that we're looking at, things that Isabel will talk about in a minute. And Ariel kind of wandered over to Nestor. He was pretty new at the bank and said, okay, what are you doing? How are you doing that? And I'm just repeating the story he told me, which was that he said, okay, we better up our game. And that's the kind of competition that I can get behind. And I think we can see that going further, because I know that as we see the remaining projects this year from water and sanitation, we're also going to see some interesting things on gender there. So thank you, Ariel. All right, Isabel, your turn. So you can see that energy took an approach that was starting with the institutionality of the energy sector. How did transport think about this at the front? Where did you start?
Well, first of all, thank you, Julie, and for letting the transport division share this wonderful experience. We started by building a framework. That's the areas, or as Andy said, the strategic areas that we were going to tackle for the next 3 to 5 years. Similarly to energy, we consider women participation as part of the labor force as one of our pillars. But one special angle to see this was women as users of the transport systems. And it's not so crazy if you think about that more than 50% of the users of the public transport systems in the region are women. If you want to translate that into clients, well, that's 50% of the clients or 50% of the revenue of the systems. Moreover, we tend to do more trips related to non-income generated activities. We travel more frequently. But not everything was so simple. When we first talk about this topic to our counterparts, it was hard, and what we found is that the narrative of gender in our sector wasn't very well received. So that's how we came with the idea of having a new narrative in our transport sector, and that's when we see the open contest of the regional public goods, and we came with the idea of creating the Transport Gender Lab. Transport Gender Lab, it's an attempt to change the concept of gender, making it more appealing for the cities, and actually bringing data, bringing evidence that it's a lot of interesting things to do in this area. Actually today, and I'm very proud to say that, we're launching in the IDB webpage the Transport Gender Lab repository. This is the first one of its kind. I mean, I think it's the first one in the world that takes all the initiatives of the cities in terms of gender and improving the service for passengers and put it together. And I think it's a great example on how to do creative things. We started with 4 cities. It was hard to get those 4 letters, get the commitment of the authorities. They were just like, why am I giving you these letters saying that I'm going to commit to work for gender equality in the transportation sector. But today, we have 7 cities, and this has become like a really, a nice thing to show and say that projects like the metro in Quito or the one that it's going to build in Bogota, hopefully, are going to be, under the Transport Gender Lab and are going to be taking initiatives from there. I think that's why today I'm happy to share with you a video that the governor from Jalisco, one of our members, sent us today, and that really can explain you a little bit more of that enthusiastic approach that Gender Lab can bring to the region.
Estoy muy honrado de estar con ustedes a través de este medio, en este evento del Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo. Es allí donde Transport Gender Lab ha sido un aliado para el estado de Jalisco. Nuestros sistemas de transporte trabajan constantemente para adaptarse a las necesidades específicas de las mujeres. Me permito destacar algunos de ellos. Por ejemplo, la incorporación de más de 900 mujeres a la Policía Vial del Estado, en una acción que fomenta la igualdad de oportunidades y le ofrece a las jaliscienses por primera vez en la historia la posibilidad de ejercer como autoridad del espacio público. Además, la concientización del resto de la sociedad también es importante, por lo que se puso en marcha la campaña de sensibilización Expulsemos el acoso. Finalmente, quiero destacar que con el Transport Gender Lab se está llevando a cabo un estudio de los comportamientos de viaje de las mujeres dentro de un corredor intermodal en el área metropolitana de Guadalajara. Con el estudio obtendremos información de primera mano que nos ayude a entender cuáles son las necesidades de infraestructura de las mujeres y desarrollar líneas de política pública para atender estos requerimientos en nuestros proyectos de infraestructura. Como miembros del Transport Gender Lab, estamos muy emocionados de lanzar en el marco de este evento la página web de la red que se consolidará como una plataforma para compartir nuestras experiencias e iniciativas con las demás ciudades miembros.
So, Isabel, I was recently in Quito, and I was with the wife of the mayor, and they were telling me about some of the work that we've done that combines gender-based violence, transport, and equality in the transport system. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that and whatever else you're most excited about that you see in the work that we're doing and the Gender Transport Lab.
Before answering your question on Quito, maybe what I would like to highlight is that Transport Gender Lab has a benchmarking. So what we did is we went to every single city, we gathered information, very high detailed information on these initiatives, the campaigns, the technological apps that they have in place, the improvements in infrastructure that they're trying to push. And at the end, what we have is this repository when you can compare how is every single city doing. The areas that we tried to evaluate was like things like infrastructure, campaigns, education and civic initiatives, initiatives on prevention, and others. And at the end, that was the best, scorecard to show to the cities how well they were doing or the areas that they could improve. So at the end, this is like a positive competition that invites cities to do better things. What did we learn? And I'm gonna, before answering Quito, because it's the best one, we learned things as interesting as knowing as Ciudad de Mexico has in place 6 initiatives on prevention, or Santiago has 4 programs to promote women participation in the sector labor force. Also, we learned that cities as Guadalajara, Ciudad de Guatemala, Santiago, and others, they don't have any technological apps. And actually, by being, after being part of this regional public good, they could benefit from the app that Bogota has, that is the safety pin, because it's an open source code, and now it's like part of the regional public good. So now I'm going to talk about the Quito one, which is the most exciting one, because it is a real example, or at least that's how I see it. Quito came with an initiative that it's called the panic button. And this is not only like a noise that you can make inside the buses to report an attack or report a harassment. This is a protocol. This is a protocol that involves everybody, in the value chain, even police. One of the successful cases is that a case of harassment, a terrible one, ended up in judicialization. And I think, as I said at the beginning, that's an example to the society and to the users that there are things that are not acceptable in our transport systems.
And to be specific, I can't remember, but the guy involved got something like 12 months in jail, right? So this whole concept of changing the culture of impunity is actually happening through this example in Quito, which I think is really important. So what comes next? What are the future plans?
Well, today is our first day of our platform. We need to improve, the amount of data that we have to keep going on this diagnosis. We need to move from the anecdotal point of view to the data one to show that there is a strong business case. And, I think this event is the best framework to say that we need to improve in the evaluation on the effectiveness of what we're doing. And finally, and probably this is my hope, I really expect that Transport Gender Lab is the first seed to a more complex dialogue on inclusiveness and universal accessibility, which, we normally mention this about, but our system still lack of it. So that's where I see the future.
Terrific. That was great. So, Javier, you're next up. And, we've heard some great examples in the public sector of what's been done on gender and diversity, but at the same time, IDB Invest is doing some really great things too, incorporating gender into projects in transport and energy, as it happens. We didn't plan that. So why don't you give us a little bit on a couple of those projects, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here and to see so many people. Probably we're lacking a little bit of gender equality as well in the room, but we're making great progress. And thank you very much for inviting IDB Invest. I'm glad to represent IDB Invest here. You're right. We like competition, so we saw the examples in transport and energy. And we did basically two very different things. So last year, not this year, we closed two project finance transactions. These are the first two project finance transactions in Argentina since the early 2000s, basically in renewables. What we did is, okay, this is very innovative, but let's do something innovative also on gender. And what we did is, we were bringing the C2F, the Canadian fund, and Brett is very proud about this. And really, what we did is we stretched C2F's mandate, which was really to promote climate change mitigation, in this case in Argentina, to basically implement a gender program. And what we did was basically two things. First of all, it's an internship program, bringing specialists from engineering, mathematics, science, and basically women to the renewable energy activities of our sponsor. And this was relevant because it may seem a little program, but at the end of the day, what we're doing is this is not only at the project level, we're bringing this at the corporate level. This is Central Puerto. Central Puerto is the largest power producer in Argentina. So this is bringing awareness at a corporate level. That's one thing. The other thing that we did is, how do we drive, let's say, more gender awareness and training internally? So basically what we did is, okay, you, Central Puerto, you're going to be committing formally to the UN Women's Empowerment Principles. You're also going to be developing a training, basically not only at the top management level, but also at the mid-management level with women and men, basically on gender equality in the workplace. And you're going to be also approving a gender action plan, as we did at IDB Invest. Basically, this will be a gender action plan approved by the board of directors, where there's commitment about budgeting on gender, of course, deadlines associated to this, and indicators to track all the actions on gender. How did we did this? Basically, when we use the fund, basically there's what we call an outcome-based pricing. So to the extent, as we monitor their actions, to the extent that they comply with all the things they committed to, there's a reduction on pricing. And this is pretty sensitive. As you may imagine, pricing in Argentina is relatively high. So there's a reduction in pricing, and there's an initial one to the extent that there's, of course, there are milestones. and there are 2 additional reductions over time. Then we did in transportation something different. This was 2 years ago, a little bit more than that, in Mexico. This is the Port of Manzanillo. The beauty of this was a technical cooperation. And the beauty of this was basically where we were financing a container port, Contecon, with a Filipino sponsor, and this was one of 15 terminals in the port. So basically, this was a technical cooperation where we brought the Port Authority and the 15 terminals, basically to develop and commit to a infrastructure sustainability program, which there was a carbon footprint assessment component. There was an assessment on climate change adaptation, but there was specifically a program on best practices in gender in a space where you don't see many women, particularly at an operating level. And this was basically driven to APIMAN, which is the Port Authority, to successfully obtain the certificate of the new norma, the new law for basically labor equality between women and men. This was also basically also tracking through the life cycle of the women of all the ports, from hiring, from basically appraisals, training, mentoring, even exit interviews, tracking the performance and how everything was done, basically with the women workforce. And this was something that, I mean, we didn't have funds to provide incentives, but they did it because they thought it was good. They even had a program which was basically tracking, okay, if we have a man and a woman that are basically, they entered into the organization at the same time, and basically we saw that they had the same qualifications and also the same appraisals. How long did it take for a woman versus a man to promote? Probably this is something that we can implement here as well at IVD Group. It will be very interesting. So these are the sort of things that we did.
So I think one of the interesting parts of this story, as we were talking about it beforehand, is that donors matter. So when we negotiated the first C2F agreement with Canada, Canada was really adamant about having a gender lens in climate. And it forced us to up our game and look at that really seriously. And conversely, not having donor money in the Manzanillo case made it less possible for us to provide a financial incentive to get what the Port Authority was doing to apply not just to our one little terminal, but to the 15 terminals where you could really change an industry.
Yeah. No, that's totally true. You touch on the issue, on this. We've raised this to the board many times and to the members of the board, where we need more donor funding for this. What we did is we have donor funding for climate change mitigation. We stretched the mandate for gender components, but we don't have funding for things that are sustainable infrastructure, even if there's no climate change mitigation, for water and sanitation and so forth, and specifically for gender. So by bringing, because at the end of the day, we're talking with corporates, and we're talking with, our clients are normally men. And when you bring this issue, it's, yeah, this is nice, but who's gonna pay for this? Because I've got shareholders. So that's why, and we need to bring more examples to them. So this is a sort of chicken and egg situation. If we bring more examples because we have more, and we need to have this funding, we can show and pitch our clients that this is going to be productive for them, it's going to be positive for their, even for the numbers and their returns. So I basically claim again that, and I think there's been a lot of improvement here, that we obtain specifically more funding for the things that are not related to renewables and climate change mitigation.
And all those shareholders need to read Larry Fink's recent letters to companies, seeing that this is both the smart thing to do, the necessary, or all three, smart, necessary, and right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are going to roll another video before we turn to Karelia.
Hay que realmente amar ese uniforme para llevarlo, porque ese uniforme significa compromiso, significa mucho sacrificio.
La reforma policial se fundamenta precisamente en la transformación cultural de la policía. Crear o formar un profesional de policía, para tal efecto habrá que iniciar desde la base.
¡Arriba! El perfil de ingreso del estudiante del ITP en la actualidad es un perfil totalmente diferente. Es un estudiante que ha cursado su ciclo de formación media.
Pasamos de programas de policía comunitaria a convertirnos en una policía comunitaria.
¿Y cómo ha estado con su familia?
Es un policía que está formado en derechos humanos. Es un policía que sabe resolver conflictos. Un policía más cercano, un policía más humano.
¡Media! ¡Vuel! ¿Cómo está la moral? ¡Alta!
Tener mujeres dentro de las filas policiales también nos garantiza un grado más de confiabilidad y sobre todo de honorabilidad.
¡Policía!
La policía le cambia la vida a uno y dentro de la institución me formaron el carácter. En la institución me enseñaron a respetar y eso es lo que haré.
Hoy por hoy estamos convencidos que estamos formando al mejor policía de la historia de la institución policial.
So it's easy in retrospect when you see those numbers. But Honduras was a country in the middle of what was a huge security crisis. How did you get them to see that gender was actually a part of how that was going to get better?
Well, sometimes a crisis can turn into an opportunity, and that's what happened in Honduras. Indeed, in 2011, Honduras was the most violent country in the world. It has the highest homicide rate in the world. So the response of the government was to reform one of the weakest institutions in the country, that was the police. And we have the opportunity to contribute with this police reform from the beginning. In partnership with the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, COSUDE, we started a loan in 2012, which main objective was to reform the education at the lowest level of the police, which concentrates the 90% of the police forces. At this point, only 10% of the police forces were women. This, in comparison with the female economically active population, that is 40%, Honduras was very low in the women force for police. So the decision of the government in order to hire more women in the police was based in the evidence that showed that collaborating in the community police with women, it increased the capacity to resolve with a non-violence conflict resolution, and also it has transparency and accountability in the police forces. That is why after 5 years, the police forces now have 20% of the forces are women, and also increase the trust of the community in the police from 10% in 2011 to 54% in 2017. Also, now we can say that Honduras is not anymore the most violent country in the world. The homicide rate decreased by 50%, and this is a huge achievement in comparison with the countries in this region. So it's still a work in progress, and we still seeing results.
You look at that video and you see that we seem to have been very successful in recruiting women. And you know, that's not easy when you make that kind of change. What are some of the things that were done to improve the pull of the police force for women? And is this something we can replicate elsewhere?
Yes, well, you have to have a clear strategy in order to increase the women at the police forces, and Honduras did. Honduras went to a huge institutional transformation. They had to change the curriculum in order to train the police. Also, it changed the profile of the police in order to recruit people. Now the police have to finish the high school level in order to be a police. And in some cases, we have a woman with a bachelor degree. Also, they increased 40% the salaries of the police, and the facilities, the infrastructure in order to prepare the police changed, in order to offer better conditions for women. And also the medical services changed. They have now many specialties in order to attend the police staff force.
So there's also there's an underlying theme here in Honduras, as there is elsewhere in the region and in the Caribbean in particular, in this case, about gender-based violence. And that's another area that we're playing in and innovating in. Some of the things we've done in the Caribbean in particular are quite interesting. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, well, one of the main challenges in the citizen security and justice sector is to have quality data and information in order to compare the situation in different countries. In the Caribbean, we are working with the Institute for Women of the George Washington University, and also we are working with the United Nations Women in order to standardize the methodology and the surveys to measure what is the real universe of violence against women in the Caribbean region. So we applied these surveys in Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. We have some findings about these surveys, and we see the necessity to empower the situation of women in this region. Because the violence against women is associated with the lowest level of education of the woman in this region. Also, we would like to highlight some other initiatives that we have contributed in other countries like Mexico that we launched in August through the Secretaría de Gobernación, one of the unique platforms that disaggregate the information of violence against women in this country, and now they can have studies comparing the situation in the different states of Mexico at national level. And this is the first time that we can diffuse this type of information because it's a very big problem in Mexico.
And that information is now public. I mean, the platform
Yes,
is
it's
a public platform.
Yes, and have a special characteristic that also we have what is called Minería Web, that we can track different social networks in order to see what are the people saying about this problem in the different states of Mexico, and there is a very innovative tool.
So first of all, I think that this is just an amazing thing, and kudos to Mexico to actually being willing to put this data out there in the public domain. I think hopefully we'll be able to use that to bring that to other countries, and through that get more visibility across the issue of gender-based violence. So we had to make a decision when we did this. It was go deep or go broad. And we decided to go broad because hopefully you heard from all of this the breadth of things that are being done, and it has appealed to some of those synapses in your brain that are going, ooh, that was cool, I might be able to adapt that. For those who are frustrated by the fact that we didn't go deep, they're all findable and more than willing to talk further about each and every one of these experiences. So I want to thank each one of you while we do a little switch. Andy, Ariel, and Isabel will remain. Javier and Karelia will step down. Ivory will come on up. And we're going to segue to our next topic, which is about things that we're learning from our work with a quick video.
Pero yo decía, wow, operadora, una mujer, porque en toda mi vida lo más que había visto eran varones. Hasta ahora, pues, hasta yo misma lo estoy experimentando. El primer día, el momento fue ir a terreno y agarrar esa máquina. Yo decía, me vaya a matar, pero no, ya miré que no es nada difícil. Siempre tenés que tener tu seguridad a sí misma, porque si no la tenés, no lo vas a hacer.
El programa de formación de operadoras de maquinaria pesada en Nicaragua tiene una meta específica: poder incluir 6 mujeres en cada uno de los tramos de obra que está en construcción en este momento en Nicaragua, con financiamiento del BID y ejecución del MTI.
Mamita, increíble, ¿tú pudiste hacer eso? Sí, amor, yo lo pude. Qué alegre, mamita, qué guapa te ves, mamita linda. Mi madrecita, te amo. Fue cosa que para mí alegre me siento, pero al mismo tiempo usted sabe que son cosas que a mí me aportan muchísimo, porque en primer lugar con este procedimiento que ya tengo, ya tengo un conocimiento de que yo puedo trabajar ya o ser una operadora ya, porque ya ahora siendo una operadora, yo sé que voy a tener una mejor vida. ¿Para quiénes? Para mi hijo, para así poder ayudar a mis hijos, ya darle una buena educación en primer lugar y tal vez ser alguien en la vida más.
I love that video, other than the fact that they decided to turn the hard hats into pink. It's my only issue with this, but so this program has trained 48 women so far. There were 12 in 2017, which was the initial year, and 36 so far in 2018. And of those 48 women, 75% have been hired by contractor companies. And you couldn't help but see the big impact that that's having on their individual lives. And you can only imagine the impact that that's having as changing stereotypes and opening new horizons for every one of those women, everyone who sees those women. It wasn't easy to do, but companies who've hired these women, as witnessed with that 75%, have seen great things too. They've seen fewer accidents, better insurance rates, their equipment is better taken care of, people show up more on time, and they show up more. So there are real benefits here to companies as well. But the question is, okay, 48, it'll be more than that maybe next year. Can we get this to scale? Can we do this elsewhere? And that's kind of what we're trying to learn from some of these experiments.
Well, I'm really happy to have the chance to talk about this other strategic area that the Transport Division has. And answering to your question, I think right now we are with a problem of scale. It's real that we are only tackling, the projects that we are financing. But I see here a very important thing, and it's the demonstrative effect. The impact that this has had on other, women seeing their peers on top of a heavy equipment, it's pretty significant. What I think we need to do is to bring more actors to the table. We, in the case of Nicaragua, we already have the government. Up to some point, we have the contractors or the private sector, but we also need other ministries to get involved. This takes me to say that this pilot was also reproduced in other 2 countries. One was Bolivia, and the other was Paraguay. Paraguay, we got very good results. We trained around 61 women. We have trained so far. However, we haven't got any labor market absorption. So this is kind of the things that we need to improve. What I would say is what we have as a big outcome, it's a lot of knowledge on the value chain of the industry. Sometimes, the first thing that we heard when we came with this initiative was why women on heavy equipment or non-traditional jobs, they don't need it. They cannot carry heavy stones. That was the first comment I got from even my own colleagues. But then when we actually understood the value chain, what we saw is that there was a lot of, or lack of knowledge on what women really want. At the end, what we really want to do with these kind of initiatives is to present our sector as one of equal opportunities, more than just increasing women participation. It's just things as basic as the recruitment. We present, men are required for heavy equipment. I mean, we can change that and say men and women. So that's kind of the outcomes we have so far. But this is also a good invitation to say that internally, and this is a long shot. I mean, we've been in this for 3 years already, but we need to work along with labor markets, with the private sector, in order to just move the needle a little bit more. Just consider that as a matter of scale, the portion of the financing that the bank has on the countries is still small. So if actually what we need to do is use the IDB platform to have a broad effect, of demonstrative effect, and invite others to copy us. That's what I would say.
I think it was Jonathan who, in the heat map, made the point that the cross-sectoral opportunities are huge, and that's the point you make. And I'll just say that I was in Puerto Pasorja recently in Ecuador, which is a IDB Invest project, and the person running the port made the point before we could that they send one woman and one man to the simulator to learn how to drive all the equipment in the port, because they're going to recruit women and men, because that's how they run a better port. And that's what we see, right? So, well, that's a great way to kick off the what are we learning as we're doing. And I will turn to Ivory to add her perspective on a couple of those things.
Thank you, Julie. It has been great and enormous learning opportunity for me, being relatively new to the bank, to see all the innovation from the different departments. And in fact, that's one of the things I would like to pick up in this closing, is coming back to what Carola mentioned at the beginning. I think that's fundamental. We need to innovate. Because that's what we have seen, for instance, at the European Investment Bank, being those countries which have a higher level of development and richer countries in which the basics for women in terms of access to education, health, etc., are there. So you start picking up the low-hanging fruits, but then what happens after? And that's where we will be facing also. So innovation is fundamental. And for that, I think we all, management and OVE, also need to be very aware. When you innovate, something may work, but may not work as well. So we need to allow for failure when we innovate. And that we need to be very aware of that. Of course, we want to innovate and pilot in an orderly way. So that will not be an excuse for our future evaluations. Huh? So it needs to be in an orderly way, and we need to know that we are innovating, and it may work or not work, but that's for clear. And the other element, I would say, is country demand. You were mentioning that we need to reach out to all different stakeholders, private sector, et cetera, but the country continues to be a fundamental partner for us. And I think that saying that we are demand-driven is not sufficient. It's not sufficient when we are talking about gender mainstreaming, for example, not sufficient for other elements as well. We need to work with those governments and to make them realize what will be the gains in terms of development that they will have. So we should not get no for an answer. We need to insist with them. We have had cases, and that comes from the evaluation. We can see the experience of the team. Sometimes the government, they just don't want those elements on the project. And sometimes the team don't feel sufficiently empowered to insist on those. So if we position ourselves as an institution that really care for gender mainstreaming, the teams will be empowered as well to continue their dialogue with the countries. Last but not least, I would like to close with effectiveness. We need to know whether it is working. So measuring our results are important. And I know there's been progress, and I think we need to continue that.
Excellent. Ariel.
This is the bad thing about being after you, because I was talking
Right, that was
about,
probably not fair.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, Ivory always
No, I think innovation definitely is fundamental. We have been working on that, and we will continue doing that. Effectiveness, from our perspective, in energy division. Up to now, what we have been doing is to try to learning by doing, trying to implement different initiatives, trying to learn with our counterparts how it could be more effective. But the truth is that up to now, we haven't been successful identifying what are the best alternatives to be effective implementing the gender component. So we have to learn about that. And definitely the next step that we have to take is to introduce in the different operations that we have this evaluation component to make sure what works, what doesn't work, and from there to try to escalate the good examples from now on. As I said, well, the engagement with the counterparts is fundamental. That is critical, you know, in our dialogue with the governments, but also to make them aware, and it's a little bit related with what you were talking about. When you're talking about energy, and maybe that is the same in transport and in the other infrastructure divisions, is that if you engage with the dialogue with the counterpart, they come to you and tell you, well, why gender? I want to use that same dollar for wires, for transformers, for whatever you want. But it's really our commitment. It's really something that we have to make a difference because we are a development bank to let them know why introducing the gender component is very important for them.
What, the why, the answer to that question is our value added in this conversation. No question. No question. Andy.
So I want to quickly reflect on three things that I think are secrets to success going forward. And one area where
Writing that down.
Well, you might want to wait and see if they make sense or not. But one area where I think the glass is completely full, one area where the cash register is half empty, and a third, and this is going to reflect what a lot of other people have said, where we've got a lot of work to do. So I think the glass is really completely full in terms of the incentives within this institution, and there's been a lot of progress. Julie, both you and the president have been huge champions of this issue. It's been in our career points for a number of years. SPD has made progress in delinking. Now there's strategic alignment for gender. It doesn't need to be linked to the vertical logic. We're going to have a lot more innovation. I'll let a secret out of the bag here that HRD, working with Julie's office and with GDI, is going to announce a competition for good work on gender equality, both in project design and internally with the institution. I think the incentives...
Parenthesis. On Monday, you'll see the launch of that prize, and get thinking about your nominations. Close parenthesis.
Thank you for that. So I think the incentives inside we've come a long way, and I think the glass is full. As the second piece for success is resources. There's been a lot of, we've I think, used resources reasonably wisely, dispatched technical expertise to sectors to help them innovate. But we don't have global coverage, and there's demands that can't be met. When Javier was on stage talking about IDB Invest and their blended finance, we need significant resources to pursue blended finance in the private sector. So I think the resource challenges where we need to do a better job, and we need to convince our donors to begin investing seriously in gender in the region. And then the third thing, and this reflects, I think, what a lot of people have said, is we need to be more systematic about learning and documenting what works. And I want to reflect a little bit on Transport Gender Lab, because I think that's a really good example. It's a powerful example, because it's not the IDB holding, distilling knowledge, looking inwards, gazing at our navels. It's our generating knowledge in partnership with the people with whom, the governments and the private sector with whom we're working in the region. So I think that's a good example, and I think we also need to learn from other multilaterals. But I think the more we can cross-fertilize, the more we can learn from others and learn in partnership, the more quickly we're going to generate the lessons learned and the information about what works that we need to drive our future work.
Alexandre wanted to be here today, and he had to travel unexpectedly, so I will speak sort of for VPC to add just a little bit of a perspective, which is consistent with everything that's said. You know, clearly, the more conversation that we have in the dialogue with countries, and the more we incorporate what the gender challenges are in the CDC, the more able we are to include in programming and help sectors support the gender components and the gender ideas in projects. Similarly, we started with VPC earlier this year, a project to make sure that GDI was looking at the pipeline really early in the year so that it gets to be a part of the thinking early on, to the extent that specialists either haven't thought of something, need help thinking about something, and that's part of what's made a difference, I think, this year as well. And I just want to add one more thing, which is about this measurement and effectiveness. So in the conversation that we had with Javier and Joanna about the project in Argentina, I asked the question about what we were doing to look at building our own evidence base to add to those studies. So when companies start to take actions, we're a long-term lender. So we have the opportunity to say 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whoa, are there more women in senior management? Are there more women on the board? There are. What's happened to financial performance and productivity, right? And so I think the other part of this is we get sort of caught in the thinking only about the specific time frame of our execution, i.e. our disbursement, and not staying in the picture for what's the long-term systemic impact. And particularly when you're working with large ministries, important companies, that long-term impact is really important. So thinking about staying in the picture and looking more horizontally, I think, is another piece of that learning. Okay, so I have another learning, which is that really after an hour and a half, we'd lose a lot of people. But Anne-Marie is now going to moderate our Q&A. So feel free to jump up to the microphones. Are
Yeah,
there
there's
two or
only,
one?
it looks like there's only one.
There's only one.
Yeah.
Please feel free. And Loreto, somebody has questions from the country offices? You've got them? Are they showing up somewhere? Okay.
So anyway, we want to make sure that this is interactive. I know that you probably have several questions for the people who have been sharing these amazing examples. And I know, and that's one of the things that gets me very excited because I know a lot of the other projects, that there are a lot of other examples from a lot of divisions that are equally as exciting as these. And it's very gratifying for me working across divisions to know this. And I feel really proud today to be working on this with many of you. So if you have a question for the panel, or if you have an intervention that could be super short about lessons that you wanted to add, it would have to be super short. We invite you. We only have one question so far from the COFs, or zero or one. Zero. We would love to have people from the country offices participate in the Q&A. So please send them in writing, and we'll make sure to get them up here and answered. One microphone, so if you'd like to come up, please just go ahead and jump on up.
Oh, good. Whew, saved by the bell.
She's coming.
I thought you were
gonna... Come on up, though, so everybody can see you.
I want to start, first of all, by congratulating Julie for her leadership on the gender issues. And of course, for all the team members of the IDB group. I was happy to learn and to see that you guys use several examples from Central America. I forgot to introduce myself, sorry. I'm Elvira Mendez, the Counselor for Belize in the Executive Director's Office for Central America. So it's evident that what you're saying is that we need the governments to do more on the issue of gender. And you showed perfect examples in Honduras, in Nicaragua. We have examples in El Salvador. We have women in leadership positions in Belize. In Costa Rica, we have the vice president is a woman. And everything that we're doing is really great. However, I must express our concern. And the concern is that I'm afraid that diversity might be left behind. And I'm talking about the indigenous peoples and the Afro-descendants. Yep. So maybe we will have another event on diversity, but my question is based on that. What are we going to do with diversity? Thank you.
So thanks for the question. I'm going to hand it to Andy.
Do we want to do one at a time or take a few? What would you
I'm
prefer?
going to hand that to Andy while
Others
at least a couple other people
Beautiful.
come up with questions.
So thank you for that. And I think we've had a series of quite frank exchanges with the Board of Executive Directors who pointed out quite bluntly that we've made more progress on gender than we have on diversity. And I think the administration has received that message. We're in the process of preparing a diversity action plan, which will come to the board for information in the first quarter of next year. And it's going to address how do we accelerate and deepen the work on indigenous peoples, on African descendants, on persons living with disabilities, on LGBTI populations. And this probably isn't the time to go in and say, here's some of the most important things that we think are going to be in that, but we're really committed to deepening our work, and it's going to happen, and it's going to happen relatively quickly. So thank you.
And as it's happening, many have seen or heard of the first gender PBL, which is in process, targeted Argentina. We have a PBL that we're working on in Ecuador focused on disabilities. We have a PBL that we're working on focused on people of who are indigenous. So, you know, the work has already begun. And I would say, you know, part of the reason I think that gender came first and was ahead is that women are 50% of the population and very visible, right? And it was a target that our shareholders gave us first. And I also was having a conversation about our internal work on people with disabilities. You know, you can't do everything at once, and we had to go, I think, from strength to strength. And the successes that we've had in gender are allowing us, in fact, to clone many of the things that worked and carry them into the rest of the diversity and inclusion work. So I think we'll be well served by what we've done.
And when we went to the board, and just to compliment that really quickly, we're committed to having some fast ships that leave port quickly, to continue with the Manzanillo port example, and where we can have quick wins. And Julie mentioned some of the policy-based lending on peoples with disabilities. So this plan is not, let's think about it and get it all right. We're going to produce some quick wins. Thanks.
Another question. Really, we were not that comprehensive. There has to be a question.
Or even comments sharing some of the lessons that come from where you've been working to show the breadth of this work.
Well, as the other have said, congratulations for doing this. I want to ask whether this topic is part of the discussions organized by the bank with the ministers, the regional dialogues. I know one of our division, Carelia's group of citizen security, makes sure that every year this topic is included in the agenda, but also there is a special meeting with women leaders in the sector, right? Which in the case of citizen security, there are not many ministers women, and I guess it's probably the same in energy or transport. So,
but interestingly enough, there are a lot of women in the security, senior women in the security sector in Latin America and the Caribbean. And that is a very interesting group of people, and the ProLead network is creating a network within the network around women in security, because it's a very robust group of people. And I have a feeling it's much more robust than in the other sectors.
Yeah, and the number in the justice sector is way bigger than the other security forces. But I was wondering whether this is the case for other sectors, and whether there is any intention of adding that the topic in the regional dialogues, or any other high policy dialogue.
Ariel.
Well, you know, I would prefer that Virginia.
Great.
She's our gender champion in ENE.
Virginia, step right up to the microphone.
You should address that question, and it's particularly, you know, on the dialogue that we are promoting in the region. Why don't you talk about the event that you are preparing? Sure. I think that is an important example of what we are doing. And that, you know, Virginia said, you know, we have to move this forward. The dialogue is critical, and we have to bring important messages to our counterparts.
Hi, I'm Virginia Snyder. Sorry. I'm Virginia Snyder. I'm an energy specialist for the energy division. And yes, November 13, we are holding an energy and gender event here at the IDB. You're all very welcome. We're working on the agenda right now. I think it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be the very first forum for the region. So we're going to be discussing topics such as, of course, labor market, energy access, how women are participating in the energy transition that the Latin America and the Caribbean are going through, regulation, policy. So I think it's going to be a great event. Unfortunately, we're going to miss Julie. Yeah. But you're all very welcome to come And if I can add one thing, since I have you all here, one of the things that I think I personally would like my division to do, and I think we need to engage more, is I know that many of you are doing great things, and I'm sure I can learn a lot of the things that you guys are doing, and I think we should integrate more. I think I should, like I know what Isabel is doing because she sits across from me and I have a working relationship with her, but I would like to learn from many of you. We should integrate more all the sectors, because energy needs a road, and it needs water, and I need internet, and I need a health clinic, and I need many of you to do your work so we can really have an impact. So it would be great to work together. Thank you.
Well said.
That's wonderful. Can I take advantage of the moment? I don't know if there's anybody from HUD here, or is there anybody from HUD? Yeah? So, well, do you want to share, I don't know if you have the information about in the policy dialogue that they did with the Red de Alcaldes, did you have information on that you want to share? Or that's more Nora? I don't want to put you on the spot. Anyway,
Why
so
don't you share?
I'll share, yeah. So just that there was an effort to bring together a group of women mayors, and also have other men mayors talk about what are some of the issues that they're facing in cities. And I know right now, just because it's on my desk to review as well, that they're working on a white paper to really look at the gender issues in cities to bring into their policy dialogue. So that's another example. I know ICS has done it much more frequently. SPH has also brought gender issues into their policy dialogues. It's not cross-cutting across all of them, but it is growing, and it's something that that's being actively encouraged.
Isabel.
Maybe to answer Norma's question, I would like to tell you that in 2015, we had a Transport Week dedicated to gender. At the beginning, everybody was scared, like, are you going to spend 5 days talking about gender in transport? But actually, what we end up doing there is a training for the whole division. It was very effective, and we end up with our own speakers. Everybody inside the transport division can say, I mean, nobody can say that they don't know how to mainstream gender. They're very well prepared to do it. And actually, the event was so successful that the next year, the topic of gender equality was included in one of our policy dialogues, the regional policy dialogue. But I mean, as I said at the beginning, this is a long-term shot, and we need to do it in every single space that we can do to increase awareness.
Andres.
Well, thank you for this wonderful event. My question is just out of curiosity, because I saw the project on citizen security. So I was thinking, is there anything that, then an idea came to me, is that all the project seems to be focused on cisgender women. Is there anything that the bank is doing on transgender women? I'm thinking specifically like the transgender women in jail, like how they are treated. So I just, out of curiosity, if that's an area in which the bank is working or is thinking about working on.
We're going to hand that to Karelia to kick off.
Well, in citizen security also we are working in the penitentiary system in order to improve the rehabilitation programs and also the infrastructure spaces for people. And we actually have a big project in Costa Rica that is working with improve the infrastructure for women, and also we have special programs with transgender people, and also working with male. So we are working with all the population at this penitentiary system, but this is the most necessity area in citizen security. And we work together with the governments, and we are working in improving the conscious about to better to improve the condition in the penitentiary system, because the assignment of the budget going to other sectors, and this is the most the sector that needs more improvement in different countries. So right now we are working also in other penitentiary projects in Chile, and also we are going to work a second phase in Costa Rica.
Terrific.
I just wanted to let you know also that just very recently we had a research project approved for Uruguay looking at discrimination and social exclusion of LGBTIQ populations in schools. And one of the things they've been looking at very specifically, and they have the first census in the region of the trans population, and they're looking very specifically in that of how to try to then strengthen and refine the actions that Ministry of Social Development is doing in the schools to support trans kids, but also other LGBTI populations. So we're really excited about that getting off the ground.
Okay, so I think based on the attrition, that it's now time, and we're on time, to wrap up. I want to thank everybody for being here. And you know, the idea here was to share these ideas, to share the creativity and inventiveness that have permeated the projects that we talked about today, and hopefully to serve as inspiration for those who want to push the edge of that envelope. I think we have fixed our sort of institutional issues, as Jonathan put it, with the way the DEM worked. We have a ways to go, and this is something for everybody to think about, that it starts after approval, really. And that's about, is it effective, and are we having impact? And so the next day, you have to go into the system and flag the results that are gender results as gender results so that we can look at them and see the kinds of progress that we are or aren't making in execution. And these are the kinds of things that now are the next order of business. But hopefully, everybody will leave here and think of great, new, exciting, and innovative things that you all can add to the projects that you're working on. And I am volunteering everybody who was a part of this event today to serve as your mentors if you need help. So with that, let me thank everybody who participated in putting this together, everybody who participated on the stage, and all of you for coming out. Thank you.